Hello fellow sign lovers. Today I have a treat for you, namely a conversation with Vinicius Romanini. Vinicius Romanini is the professor of communication studies at the University of Sao Paulo. In his PhD thesis in 2006, Romanini completed the Semiotic of Charles Peirce, which, in my opinion, is the greatest and most important achievement in semiotic after the death of Peirce. If you're interested to know more about what Romanini is up to, he has a webpage. I provide the link in the description below. In this conversation, we went through a lot of things. We talk about the nature of semiotics, the nature of our universe, then we spoke about ethics and aesthetics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and please take part in it in the comment section below. It's a great honor again to speak to you, and thanks for your time. So yeah, let's just dive right into it.
Okay,
So,
it's my pleasure to have a conversation with you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. So let's start with the basic question, but a big question. What is semiotics?
Yeah, it is a big question. Well, from my understanding, semiotics is a more developed logic. We are kind of used to or convinced in the school that logic by the Middle Ages was already finished. So the grand vision that Aristotle had of putting the rules of reasoning in a very systematic way, we thought or used to think that by the Middle Ages, this proposal was already finished. So we had all the tools we needed to reason in a very secure or with a lot of assurance in our own reasoning. And what Peirce brings out is that actually logic was not as much as developed as we used to think. And from his reading of the empiricists, and John Locke, probably the most important one, he got the idea that we should have not only a deductive logic, I mean a logic that is based on the principles of identity and non-contradiction. This is very Aristotelian. So we can do all the deductive logic from the principles of identity and non-contradiction, but also we should have a logic of synthetic judgments, a logic that would account for learning, for the growing of ideas, for mental habits formation, mental habits breaking. So this is something that is not in the old traditional logic. And I think it is an idea that Peirce took from the Darwinian theory of evolution. If you think about biology before Darwin, biologists would also think that the theory of life was complete. We should like a taxonomy of all living beings, all forms of life, and we were happy with that. We were not pursuing a very heating explanation about how species came into being, because we thought that those were gifts from God. So it was all settled. And Darwin came with this idea that there is evolution, there is natural selection, there is growing of information. And when Peirce accepted the Darwinian theory of evolution, since he was by nature a adaptist methodologist, he would always adapt what he had learned in one science to another. So he thought, well, if there is growing and development in biology, there must be growing in development in logic. And then he started to think about logic in an ampliative or in a synthetic manner. And that's why he came with his theory of interpretant, his theory of semiosis, which is basically a logic that not only encompasses deductive logic, but also inductive and a new form of inference that he calls hypothesis, sometimes he calls abduction, which is the origin of all novelty in our minds. Everything we learn something from experience, abduction is the kind of inference that internalizes the information that has been learned. So I think that the great, let's say, the great finding of Peirce was that we needed a more developed logic that would explain how learning and the becoming of novelty in nature and in our minds can be explained. And that's how semiotics was born.
That's very interesting. I have used this notion of semiotic logic to differentiate the semiotics from the normal kind of logic. Does that make any sense? The concept of semiotic logic.
I think when you say semiotic logic is redundant, because semiotics is by definition logic. So it is a logic more developed, or it is encompassing the traditional deductive logic and developing further to explain how synthetic inferences are possible.
So, so it is a logic of discovery, or a theory how we make new scientific theories, right?
Definitely. And how we survive. Because if you think, the reality is always challenging us. And we must have some kind of active inference to deal with the novelty that is being brought in our perception, our experience. So if we want to survive, if we want our systems to, if we want permanence, we must have a logic to internalize novelty and give us some repertoire of how to act with reasonableness, with purpose in a ever-changing reality. So not only discovery and bringing new theories, but dealing with the matters of life, the day-to-day matters of life. We need synthetic judgments to deal with everything that is happening and everything which is dynamic around us.
Yeah, that makes sense. But semiotics also a study of science, right? So how that connects to this logic, or?
Well, I would say that semiotics has as a subject matter semiosis. So semiosis is the subject matter of semiotic. If we take semiotic as a discipline or a doctrine or a new science, as you want to call it, the subject matter is semiosis, and semiosis is the action of science. So we are not only studying the taxonomy of science, the typology, the kinds of science that we find in our minds and our nature, but we must understand how science becomes science. So how science are interpreted into science, and this is semiosis. So this is continuous sign interpretation. That's what interests semiotics. Then we have to understand the grammar, which means the syntax of the semiosis, all types of signs and how they relate to one another. We have to learn about the semantics, how signs relate to their objects, so we can extract meaning from this relation. and then how we produce meaning by interpreting signs. So when we want to understand semiosis, we must understand the sign itself, all the aspects involved in the sign relations, and most of all, how this dynamic of sign relations are continuously producing new signs, signs from signs, signs from signs. This is what interests a semiotician.
Okay, I think before we dive into the more minute logic of the sign, I think the concept of semiosis needs some elaboration. I think that if the subject matter of semiotics is semiosis, does that mean that we have to regard semiosis as a real phenomena? I mean, is this the bridge between logic and metaphysics in a sense?
Yes, I think you got the right answer. Exactly. It is a bridge between semiotics and metaphysics. Why so? Because when we talk about semiosis, we are talking about purpose, we are talking about causation, and we are talking about final causes. So there is some sort of teleonomy or even teleology in semiosis. And when we bring this into the equation, you for sure we are on the metaphysical soil, the metaphysical terrain, because the the, the problem of causation, the problem of final interpretance of purpose, this is something that is not usually taken as physics in the traditional science. So we must understand that there is in nature, there is in our mind, there is maybe in the universe uh, some sorts of systems that are developing, they are internalizing information, they are building complexity from their relation to the environment, and they are pursuing ends. There is a Phineas process. And when we use those kind of words, this kind of uh, explanations, for sure we are talking about metaphysics.
And that's one aspect in your writings that is quite different from the other Peirce scholars. That what is quite um, typical of Peirce scholarship, in my opinion at least, is that they take a one element of Peirce's philosophy or a one piece of the philosophy, and then they apply it into a specific problem and usually find it very useful. But what you have argued in your writings is always that we should take the whole system, the whole philosophical system of Peirce, the architectonic of science or human knowledge. Could you elaborate why that is so important?
Peirce had this very systematic philosophic architecture. And when you take just one piece of this building and use to your own purposes, I don't think this is fair with the original thinker that Peirce was. So he was trying to develop a very encompassing view of the universe, of reality. It involves epistemology, it involves ontology, it involves methodology. So semiotic is part of this whole system. And if we want to understand truly Peirce's ideas, we must take his principles. What are the epistemological principles that are embedded in his systems? And for sure, he had this metaphysical way of thinking, which he inherits from Kant. If we read Prolegomena to All Future Metaphysics, which is the booklet that Kant wrote as an introduction to his major work on the structure of reasoning. So if we take this book, there are many questions that Kant left unsolved, and Peirce took the baton. Peirce took the questions from Kant and tried to develop from his very early age. And I think from his whole life, he was true to himself in this project of giving some answers to the problems of philosophy which were not solved yet. And semiotic is part of the answer that he gave us. So if we want to understand Peirce's semiotic, I think it is necessary to understand his whole system of objective idealism, his concept of matter as effete mind, his idea of final causation. So it's all in the same package. You cannot take a bit of it and just refute the rest of it. That's my critique to many Persian scholars that don't like to take the whole. They think that Peirce's metaphysics is like a white elephant. And we don't want to deal with this white elephant. We want just to apply what is useful. And I don't like this way of taking Peirce.
But you have also written that these kinds of thoughts about purposefulness and, if not teleology, then at least teleonomy, are quite hot topics right now in physics. Definitely. And in biology.
Definitely. I think in artificial intelligence, so there's a lot going on what is intelligence. Is it possible to build our all-purpose intelligent machine, a general intelligent machine? So what's the nature of intelligence? I don't think that intelligence is purely computational. There's more to it. What is more to it? It's exactly what we were discussing. So to have intelligence, you must have some sort of purpose, some sort of end. You are trying to reach some final end. That's fundamental to understand intelligence. And I think that's fundamental to understand life as well. I don't believe in design, intelligent design. That's not what I'm proposing. But I do think that systems, they have a natural tendency to permanence. So besides what we in thermodynamics say entropy or the natural tendency to disorder, that's true for sure. But besides that, to understand and to study life and intelligence, we must also take the opposite direction. There are dynamic processes that are, for sure, they are building complexity by going far from a thermodynamic equilibrium. And this nature of building complexity by conservative laws, by keeping itself far from thermodynamic equilibrium, this is something that we must understand, not only in the traditional physics, but also in our philosophical conception of nature. And I think semiotics give us some tools to think those processes in a very intelligible way.
Yeah, I would like to maybe think about the bridge between semiotics and that thing, what you just said. So Peirce famously said that the universe is full of sign, maybe, or perfused with signs. And that is quite enigmatic to a lot of people. They don't know what that means. But is it possible to refrain that quote by saying that the universe is perfused with systems?
Yes, from the system theory perspective, we can say that the universe is a system perfused with systems, but what kind of systems? And then semiotics can help us. Well, systems that are able to internalize information, to internalize complexity, to able of permanence. So to explain how life is possible, we must understand those attributes of systems. And I think that there is one thing embedded in Peirce's theory of science that maybe not everyone has understood, is that the very dynamics of science developing is by internalizing information from the dynamic object into the immediate object. So the immediate object is the grounding, and as the sign internalizes, learns from the dynamic object, its internal object or its immediate object is enlarging, is growing. So this flow of information from the dynamic object to the immediate object, this can be explained in a differential equation. And this is very important from the physicist point of view or the mathematical point of view, because all laws of nature are based on differential equations. So if you want to understand some dynamic process, some system that is changing in nature, you have to find what kind of differential equation is governing the change, and then you go find the Lagrangian of that differential equation. And once you get the Lagrangian, then you try the exact solution of the differential equation, and then you have the formula. So the formula is the exact solution of a differential equation. So semiosis is a sort of logic that give us a tool to think all differential equations that we can find in nature as based as a flow of information from the dynamic object, that can be the nature, that can be the knowledge which is in your mind flowing to my mind. So there is a flow of information from your mind into my mind. And whenever there is flow of information, there is this dynamic, and we can explain everything we learn from nature based on this differential equation. So this is maybe some sort of new paradigm of science, thinking what we already know from another perspective, maybe a perspective that will allow us to understand the whole of nature in a much more comprehensive way than we are usually do.
So just to maybe to simplify what you just said, so we can conceptualize the whole universe as a kind of a fractal picture of systems. Is that?
Yeah, we can. The idea of a fractal, it's a very interesting because it has this holistic view that any portion of the universe, in some sense, represents everything else, which is not in the point itself. So that's the definition of a hologram. What is a hologram? A hologram is a portion of space that has all the information about what is not in that portion of the space, in a very blurred, in a very confused way. But a hologram brings all the mix of waves that come from whatever is not in the part or the portion of space that we are taking as the hologram. So the fractal has the same nature, because the tiny part of a fractal, you can learn from this tiny part about the whole system, because there is this reverberation of the structure in the fractal in the whole of the more encompassing system in which the fractal is a part. So I think these are very interesting ways of thinking about semiosis.
The way you put it right there, as this that every system has a representation of the universe in it. That for me, that was a great aha moment when I understood that every system represents the whole of reality, and representation is just another word for sign.
Perfect. Yeah. That's what I believe too. Perfect. Exactly.
But as you said in the beginning, that semiotics is the logic of discovery, or the logic how we can learn or grow our information. So this is the logic how systems can develop and grow. And what is maybe new or even revolutionary in this worldview is that systems are seen to perceive and actively making inferences about the surrounding environment.
Perfect. Exactly. That's what I believe. Why so? Because if they don't do that, they will disappear. There's no permanence. So the only way to keep together the system together is that there must be a sort of membrane, a sort of some sort of interval, some sort of interface between the internal and the external. And this interface is what is selecting information. And not only that, this interface enables the system to minimize or minimalize its firstness or its free energy, and it allows the system to act or to make inference about the surrounding, the environment, as to change the environment, as to, let's say, as to increase its chance of survival or permanence. So every system, we as individuals, or we as society, we are not only learning from the environment, but we are acting on the environment. We are changing the environment to lower the cost of survival, because the environment, there's a lot of animosity around us.
It's chaos.
Wild. It's a wild environment. So if we civilized the environment, if we change the environment through culture, and we transform the environment in something more predictable, so the cost of living in energy and in cognitive effort, the cost goes down. So it's a very good thing, not only to learn, but also to change the environment around us, to minimize the free energy that is firstness or entropy, so that we can live in a more comfortable way. We don't have to expend so much energy, because we have everything under control. The environment is under control, and our internal states are under control. Maybe that's why we develop an ego to take control of our internal states. Maybe subjective is something that emerges from this need. And maybe that's why we have society, we have social minds that take control of the environment, so we don't have continuously to fight with the wilderness of the surrounding environment. And this is semiosis, internalizing information and acting, the sign action towards a final purpose, towards a final cause, naturally produces all this culture, naturally produces subjectivity, the self, It's all part of the same process. That's what I think it's so beautiful about semiosis, because when you get to the point, you try to understand the self psychology, and you can understand the self as semiosis. You can understand nature as semiosis. You can understand the universe as semiosis, because everything is part of a larger whole. So we are all connected. We can also say that we live in a participatory universe. We participate in everything that is in contact with ourselves.
That's a revolutionary idea, I find, and very has a lot of implications for a lot of things, and it almost goes into a theological realm, this kind of thinking.
Yeah, we can go there too. I am not a religious person. I don't think that there is a super powerful mind like orchestrating this whole process. So I don't believe there is a super intelligence as God that is taking control of everything. But we can say that if there is this divine entity, it is the very process of growing, of developing, of thirdness, synechiism. Well, Peirce says evolutionary love. So if we can define God in a semiotic perspective, we would say that God would be this evolutionary love, agapastic dynamic of transformation, of growing thirdness, of putting things together and making things work in a very large system, always making the system grow, thirdness growing. I think it's the best way to describe a divine process. We are all part of this process.
Yeah. Those are very very interesting questions. Just to stay here a moment, I have had this thought. I don't know what do you think about this, but if we think about that, or think the universe as a system, and every system adapts to its environment, so there's always a more like a general system or a general thing, then what is the most general system, the super order or the super habit that we are adapting
That's
to?
a wonderful question, because the super order is precisely something like a differential equation.
So God is a
So if you say,
differential
well, what is
equation.
God? God is a differential equation. So, and the universe is not static. So your question would make sense if the universe was static in its border, but the universe is growing. It is expanding. So the universe, in some sense, is learning from itself. It is developing. It is internalizing processes, and it is expanding. So there cannot be a super intelligence, because there's always novelty being produced. And this super intelligence is always learning from itself. So there is no final representation of the universe as it, as substance. It is always a process. It is always a differential relation, a growing dynamic.
And that's the big difference between the ancient Greeks, how they thought about teleology, and how Peirce thinks about teleology. That the Greeks thought that there is this eternal, perfect order that can be found, whereas Peirce thinks that everything is always developing. And even if there is this super order of, if we want to name it God, the God is also developing and growing and learning. So everything is in dynamic movement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we can say that what is governing the whole process? Actually, it is the process governing itself. So God is not a thing, something material. Is not made of rocks or stars or light or energy or anything else. It is this abstract logic or semiotic process by which there is this ever-growing process of developing. And I think this is intellecti, intellectia, which is the perfection, the Aristotelian intellectia. For me, intellectia is not a final state. Intellectia, it is a perfect process. And a perfect process, it is a process by which we are dying, but also giving birth, renewing ourselves, and the fact that there is no ending, not a final necessarily a final point in time or space. I think that makes intellectia perfect because it is actually the process. It is a very abstract, a very mental entity.
So it's not the destination, but the way to the destination, in a sense.
It's much better than the destination.
Yeah.
To be on the road is better than arriving at some point.
To stay in this metaphysical speculation for a bit longer, because they are so interesting, this does not mean that there isn't a direction in this process, or there isn't a tendency, or that this process would be arbitrary or chaotic in any sense, but there is a definite tendency, and the tendency is the growth of information. So what does that mean in practice? How we should think about that?
Well, that's a mystery.
Okay.
I think that's the question that is at the basis of all sciences.
Okay.
Because we know that the second law of thermodynamics is true. We know that there is for sure the growth of entropy. Entropy is increasing, and every process, every dynamic process is producing entropy, but also we see around us and we see order, and we see that there is order formation, there is the increase of complexity, and we don't know at the end if the tendency is the thermical death of the universe, or there will always be some balance between the growth of entropy and the growth of complexity. I think this is a question that must be answered, means to answer for, let's say, a final answer to that question. But from the semiotic point of view, there is always growing the tendency to become more general, and which means that there will not be a final state at thermodynamic equilibrium at the end of the universe, but there might be at some point when we are maybe close to the thermodynamic equilibrium, there might be another Big Bang. And another universe might start from this primordial soup. We don't know. We won't be alive to check that out. But if there was a Big Bang at the beginning of our universe, why not expect that at some point, when we are getting close to the death or thermal death of the universe, that another process will begin and another systems of developing, of increasing, of universe formation will start all over again? There's no way we can give this final answer.
Very, very interesting. To maybe go back a little bit to more maybe practical things.
Okay.
You said that semiotic is a logic, right? But is it also a method? I mean, we talk about that. Is this a new scientific paradigm? So, what it would mean for other sciences to adapt this semiotic view or view semiosis as something real? And you said also that everything could be conceptualized as semiosis. So, how widely should this logic be adapted and what that even means?
Yeah, it is a very good question. Well, I start my answer remind you that in his last years, Peirce was accepting the reality of firstness, the reality of possibility. And there is this very interesting, there are many excerpts of his thoughts in his more mature phases, but there is this very one that I like a lot. And he thinks in this way. Now imagine that in some future, a paleontologist will find a fossil fish that is buried right now. In 200 years from now, some paleontologist will find this fossil fish and will study and will come up with a new discovery, a new theory about our geological eras. Now, for Peirce, this fossil fish that is buried there is already a sign. It is not found yet. It has not been analyzed. It has not been studied. But although it is hidden from any mind, it is already a sign waiting to be discovered. So that what it means to be a realist, to accept the reality of possibility, because the very possibility of being a sign already makes it a sign. Now, if we take this to the universe, so imagine any star that has not yet reached our eyes, and we will only reach our eyes 200,000 years from now. It is already a sign to us, because nothing is a sign in itself. The sign is a process. The sign is a relation. So everything has the possibility of being a sign to any possible mind. So if we think this way, the whole universe can be signs of possibility. We can learn from the universe at any moment and at any point. So everything by definition is already a sign. If we take, well, let's imagine that a photon right now is reaching a rock in Mars. This rock, when it's reached by this photon, is making the rock a little warmer. There's more entropy in the rock than there was before the photon had reached it. So the very photon that reached the rock is already a sign of the transformation that will produce in the rock. You see how we can think every physical process, and that's why I'm bringing this example from light, because at the end, energy, light, and matter are basically the stuff of physics, the universe. But if you take a single photon and find out that it can be taken as a sign, then everything else that is made of photons, everything else that is made of energy, can also be taken as signs. So this is not a metaphysical declaration. This is a logical consequence of adopting the semiotic perspective. So I'm not making a grand metaphysical proposition. I'm just extracting the necessary consequences of adopting Peirce's definition of science.
And that is why semiotics is more general science than metaphysics.
Yes, exactly.
It's a very important thing. But so everything is a sign, basically, logically speaking. So what I'm here trying to think about or to elaborate is the power of this kind of worldview or this semiotics. While in contemporary science there is a lot of compartmentalization between different schools of science. The physics is quite different from biology, and human sciences are very separate from the hard sciences. And semiotics has the power to unify the whole project of science to a unified whole where every science are working for a common whole, for a common purpose. So that, for me, it's something that should be maybe talk a little bit more.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have a complete development of semiotics. That's why this entrepreneurship is so important, because if semiotics can be this new worldview, this new methodology of doing sciences, then it must reach its more developed form. Semiotics is not yet all developed. That's why it's so important to have a complete description of all types of science. That's why we must understand how semiosis happens. So once you get all those relations in place, then maybe we can go and give one step ahead and say, well, let's put bridges among the sciences and see if semiotic can help us put this unified theory of knowledge. And I think it is a very good candidate of giving us this frame to bridge all knowledge. I think semiotics by nature is transdisciplinary. It does not obey the compartments of all disciplines. It is a way of seeing that is above the divisions, the traditional divisions of science. And that's why it is so powerful. And that's why it has so many enemies as well. Because there is this critique about semiotics and semioticians that semiotics wants to be hegemonic. Semiotics wants to explain everything. And that is annoying to many scientists because they are comfortable in their zones of knowledge, their traditional rooms of science, and they don't entertain very well this idea of a science that can be very abstract and powerful, but at the same time is not producing any proposition that is verifiable in the short term. I mean, give me some empirical theorem taken from semiotics that I can take this theorem to my lab, or I can make some calculus and I can check if this theorem is correct or if it works in the lab. So you semioticians, give me something more palpable, something that I can grab in my hand and take to the lab and check if it's true or not. So that's the problem with semiotics, being so abstract.
The xenoscopic science.
Exactly, semiotic science.
Something we should talk about in another video.
Right.
But there's also, well, I'm a sociologist, so there is this kind of a zeitgeist, at least in sociology, and I believe in many human sciences, that there is no possibility of systematic philosophy, that it is viewed as an arrogant mission or positivistic thing. So can you elaborate how that differs from positivism, that this is not something that is totalitarian in a sense, that it claims that it knows the truth for everyone?
Yeah, but it's also a very good question, because Peirce was in contact with Auguste Comte and the necessitarianisms and all the positivist milieu, the scientific positivist mind frame. And in some sense, we can say that Peirce have a step into positivism, but also he would define himself as a proper positivist. What is a proper positivist? It is someone that accepts some of the ideas of positivism, but does not deny a scientific metaphysics. Because positivism does not accept metaphysics. The idea of logical positivism or positivism applied to science is that everything must be verifiable, falsifiable at least, and the final test must be the laboratory, must be empirical. Yeah?
It's a Popperian view of science, right?
Yeah, the Popperian view of science, the falsiability is more subtle than the positivist view, which is basically the verificability of our theorists. But we can say that Popper extract from positivism, and actually Popper has learned his principle from Peirce. Popper himself says, well, most of my ideas came from my reading of Peirce. That's very interesting. Not everyone knows about this, but the idea that there is experience. Yeah? So we can say that pragmatism as a method, it defends that our beliefs must confront reality, and we must learn from reality, and we should give away every belief that is not prepared to explain reality. But also, Peirce was ready to accept this proper positivism of a scientific metaphysic. And that is something that does not go into the positivist way of thinking. What is this metaphysical or scientific metaphysics? Is the idea that we must understand final causes, that not everything is mechanicistic, not everything is deterministic, not everything is necessary. That's why Peirce developed a logic of vagueness. And nothing is less positivistic than a logic of vagueness.
That's right? True.
And I would say in Peirce's defense that his systematic way of thinking was, and he says that, was a hope, was not a rule. But we must hope, if we want to understand nature, if we want to be true scientists, we must hope that there is a connaturality between our minds and nature as mind, nature taking as a mental process that would lead us to some sort of panpsychism. So there must be some connaturality between our finite minds and the infinite mind of nature. If there is no connaturality, there's no hope we can understand nature by learning from the tiny parts, the fractal parts, the very holographic space in which we are living here. So if there's no hope for this connaturality, the whole scientific uh, project is doomed to failure. So if there is hope of this connaturality, then there must be a systematic view. If we entertain a hope of a connaturality between our thoughts and nature, then the whole system that must come together, and we must be able to reach this whole system. It might take a long time. This final opinion must be a mere conditional future, because we don't have all the minds that we need, we don't have all the time, we don't have all the resources. But it is real that if we had all the minds, all the resources, all the time, then sooner or later we would reach a true representation of reality. So if we entertain this hope, then there must be a systematic view of arranging of, of nature.
So we must have a hope for the reality of a final truth
Exactly.
in the universe.
But
yes, the final truth changes and develops, right? So
well, the final truth is the very process of development. Yeah. So we should not take the final truth as something that we can grab in our hands, or we can represent. The final truth is actually when we take part of the very process of developing the final truth, when we are part of the very mind which is producing the reality. So that's when we reach intellectia, that's when we reach God, if we want to take this
when we
word.
become one with the reality of the universe.
That's right. That's right.
So could that be thought as a kind of a perfect harmony?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is. And this harmony does not mean something like a crystal static. So when we get to the harmony, it's not something that is static as a crystal, crystal clear. No, it is something that is always in this process of dying and giving birth and producing novelty. That's the harmony. The harmony is actually being able to accept that there is permanent change. The process is everlasting.
There is always novelty.
There's
and
always
originality. Yeah. One other thing that came to my mind about the question about positivism is that isn't it so that the idea of fallibilism, the idea that at every moment everything we believe could be wrong, hypothetically, is something that is absent from positivism?
No, I don't think so, because the positivists, they were ready to discard any theory that were not attuned with the experiments. So the positivists, I think they were fallibilists, but in a sense that is different from Peirce's idea, because Peirce's fallibilism is more ontological. It is not only methodological, because in positivism, the fallibilism is part of the method. In Peirce's view, fallibilism is something that is part in the very metaphysical process of growing. So everything that is in the nature, everything which is real, is already part of this fallibilistic process.
It is the idea that everything is changing all of the time.
Changing and maybe dying, disappearing.
Yeah.
We as a species, we might disappear maybe sooner than later. And because maybe we're being very fallible in things that are very important. So the fact that we are intelligent does not mean that we are not so fallible that we can take wrong steps and go to self-extinction. So fallibilism is something very rooted in semiosis. We can be very intelligent, even very smart, but even so, we can lead ourselves to extinction.
It's a very nice thought, very nice note.
Yeah.
You touched on a very, very interesting subject, the complete logic or structure of semiosis or the sign. And that is something that you have worked on and, in my opinion, accomplished. So in his later phases, Peirce was trying to finish the logic and to find the complete minute structure of the sign, the 66 signs of reality, but he never managed to do that. But you, in 2006, in your PhD thesis, managed to finish and complete this logic that we have been talking about. How big of a deal is that, in your opinion?
Well, I must start to remind you that I am a fallibilist. So I might be wrong. I might be wrong. So although I have this theory, this doctrine or this system, which I call the periodic table of classes of signs, so far I'm convinced that it works the way I see semiosis. I have been testing for now nearly 15 years those ideas, and I'm convinced to this point that the periodic table is a very interesting tool to apply semiotics, but I am a fallible, pragmatic scientist, and I'm ready to give away my theory if at some point I don't find it as appealing as I find it now. Said that, being that said, I do think that what I try to do in my PhD thesis, and I'm still doing it right now because it is a research project, is taking Peirce's fundamental ideas, knowing that he himself was not happy. He was not in his last years. He was not assuming that the whole system of semiosis or the theory of science was complete. He was still developing to its completion. And he even says that, well, this is the work for future generations. I am like I think he says backwoodman.
Yeah.
That is developing a trail, cleaning a trail in the forest of science, and future generations will transform this trail, this track into a road. But at this point, this is all I can do. So I think it is part of our job as semioticians, give some thoughts and try to develop this envision system, complete system of 66 classes of science. So that's why I started in my PhD project, and I took a different road from Peirce. Peirce was starting from, I would say, bottom up. He was starting from his definition of sign, his definition of the object, then how a sign relates to an object, and he was constructing. I would say he was adopting this constructive theory of trying to reach the final scheme, the final system. I started from the top and went down, and I say, well, if I start from the top and take the right road, I should be able to arrive at the same point where Peirce left us. If I take the right path from the above and go down to the minute logic, the minute aspects, if my path is correct, what I find doing this deduction, it is a sort of transcendental deduction. If I do this transcendental deduction, I will get to the very same aspects that Peirce was developing. So he was doing this synthetical approach, and I tried this top-down, this deductive approach. And when I did that, I found out that I needed one more sign relation, which was the relation between the sign, the dynamic object, and the dynamic interpretant. And I found that it's not something that I took out of my hat, something magical. No, I did that because it is a logical consequence of you extracting from the more abstract or the more complex sign, the relations among the aspects, which is the sign, dynamic object, and final interpretant. If you degenerate from this, the first degeneration is precisely the degeneration from the final interpretant to the dynamic interpretant. This is something that Peirce would arrive if he kept his way from bottom up, but he would take probably years to arrive at that, because that was his methodology. He was doing from the bottom up. When I started from the top down, that's the first degeneration that I found out and said, well, this is something that is not in Peirce's writing. He never wrote that there must be this aspect, which is the relation between the sign, the dynamic object, and dynamic interpreter. And then I continued the generation, and then I found not 10, but 11 sign relations, or sign aspects, or sign respects. So he was happy with 10, but he says, well, there might be more than 10. That's something that he says. But from the energy that I have for the last years of my life, I will take this 10 and try to find all the relations among them. Maybe that's all I can do. If there's more than 10, I'll leave to the next generations. And I found out that there must be 11 and not 10. And then I degenerated all the sign relations, and I built this structure, which is the pyramid. Is it, how is that, pyramid?
I think so. Pyramid
Okay.
or triangle.
Oh, triangle. It's easier. And this triangle has the 66 classes of signs, in which the 10 genuine classes of signs are there. In the very structure, they appear in the 10 genuine classes of signs, the very known triangle that Peirce himself drew. And when I understood that when we degenerate from thirdness, there are more levels of degenerations. When you degenerate from seconds, there are less levels. And when you degenerate from firstness, there's no level of degeneration. When you put these relations, you see that the whole triangle, it has some holes. And this is because if you do stechiology, I mean, if you do projective geometry, you will find precisely those kind of distortions that you find when you, let's say, project a three-dimensional body into a bidimensional one. Like you take the mappa mundi, the world atlas,
World map, yeah.
Yeah, the world map. If you project into bidimensional paper, you see that either Groenlandia, like Groenlandia, will be huge, or you have to leave some holes near the poles, north poles and south poles, because when you do this kind of projective geometry, necessarily when there is less to be projected, you must open and either distort or leave holes. The same happens when you degenerate from the sign relations. When you degenerate and go into the firstness, it's like you go into the pole of the earth. There's less structure there, so you gotta leave some distortion or some holes in the triangle, exactly for the same reason. It's a mathematical problem or a stechiological problem.
And these holes would be then impossible signs, right?
They're non-existent. They are not possible because they're non-existent. And when you study them, it's very interesting because when you get to study, what if there were those signs? What would happen? So I wrote a paper that I had never published, but it's written, in which I discuss the 12 holes of my periodic table. And what does the whole express? What do they say? All of them have a problem of causality. All of those holes imply something impossible, which is having a secondness as a final interpretant and a thirdness as a dynamic interpretant. So this is something that is not actually possible. Why not? Because if your final interpretant is to be a second, let's say you want to eat your piece of cake, right? That's your purpose. You want to eat. Yeah, that's your goal. Your goal is to eat that piece of cake. Then you have to actually eat or have the cake eaten. You must have secondness in the dynamic interpretant, which means you must eat it. You cannot have your piece of cake eaten if you do not eat the piece of cake.
that makes sense.
Exactly. So why, if you take the holes, you see there are paradoxes in all those holes. And all the paradoxes, they are all connected with having secondness and the final goal. Just for an example, I want to kill someone. Well, you cannot kill someone if you do not take the action of killing someone.
Mm.
So to realize your purpose, having secondness as a final goal, final interpretant, you must have secondness as a dynamic interpretant.
That makes
That's
perfect sense
why,
to me.
okay, that's why you have those holes. That's something that came naturally. And I found it some very interesting. Well, it was a natural consequence of the chart.
It's very convincing proof that you're on the right track, I would say. And I
Yeah.
of course admire your humbleness on these 66 signs or your periodic table, but my opinion is that that's the
No,
biggest
thank you.
and
I'm
most,
happy that you have said it.
yeah,
I'm
it's the
happy
most
that you have.
I think it's the most important development of semiotics or Peirce scholarship after the death of Peirce, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. Yeah, as I told you, it is under development. It is a research project, and there were some improvements in the last years. I don't know if we have already talked about it, but what I'm developing right now in this new version of my website, I'm using my periodic table as a sort of chart game, like like a chess board. So imagine that you have two players and there is a knowledge game going on. And one of the players would be you and the other would be reality. And you can play in this board, which is my periodic table. And if we go by some rules, you will always end in the minimax of the game. What is the minimax? It's like a intermediate point by which we get to a point by which nature has given some information, but not all the information. And you have expend some energy, some movements in the board game. And at the end, both of you are happy. So nature gave you some information, but not all. And you have worked out some knowledge strategy, and you learn something from the game, but not everything that you could learn from the game. So there is this minimax, and this minimax is a knowledge game. It's something that Ati Pietarinen, you know Ati?
No.
He's a Finnish guy. Ati
Ahti Pietarinen.
Okay, Ati Pietarinen. You know Marx Bergman as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. I know them personally because they were in Brazil for a number of times. And Mats Bergman, we had some time together. He came to my house and we spent some time together developing, working on Peirce's theory of science. And Ahti has this game approach to logic, and he uses Peirce's ideas. And what I'm trying to do in this board is to prove that Ahti ideas are correct, that you can play like you play chess in this board. And if you take the right rules, you can actually move your, how do you say, your pieces.
Yeah.
And get to this new belief. So the game starts when you break a belief. Then the goal is to build a new belief. And by building a new belief, you have to extract information from reality, and you have to perform some work. until you get to the minimax. And if I can do that, maybe that's a very interesting proof that the periodic table, as it is shown in my chart, it is useful to understand intelligence. It is useful to understand how science deals with nature, how science learns from experience. We'll see.
Well, when is this game playable?
Well, it is under development. There's a web designer, which is the guy who has helped me to put on air or put on web the new version of my website. And we are now working on how the pieces will move if we do it three-dimensional, if we do it bidimensional. We are trying to figure out how to design the visually the game.
That sounds very interesting.
It will be fun. It will be fun.
Yeah, just to think about this, your periodic table, it's very different from the developments of other Peirce scholars because it's mathematically consistent. It's a logic that has rules and that makes sense, and which is quite different from a lot of other Peirce scholarship, which is very vague and philosophical in a sense that they don't really, they have a lot of loose ends that they don't know how to properly, maybe they don't have a solution for a whole systematic view, which you have, which is quite a accomplishment. It's something very,
thank you,
it's great. So the thing is that now, in a sense, that logic is already complete. Is that, or how would you express it?
Well, I think that if the periodic table is correct, then we might have this very abstract, categorical way of doing logic. I don't know if a logic will be complete, because incompleteness is something that is part of semiosis and it is part of logic as well. You know, Kurt Gödel theorem of incompleteness. He has proven that once you try to write down all the theorems of a system that holds together a system, it can be mathematics, it can be logic, or it can be any system that you're trying to understand. As soon as you think that you reach completeness, then there are many paradoxes that pop up. So a system might not be ever complete, but we might have a very abstract categorical structure that allow us to understand what is underneath this dynamic process of incompleteness. And I think that's what my periodic table brings up, because it comes from Peirce's three categories. So his phenomenological view of the world, of the universe, of the phaneron, that there is firstness, secondness, and thirdness. And if we apply that to logic, to sign relations, then you have precisely 66 types or classes of signs, and they are organized in periods, in phases, and that gives you a comprehension of the process. Maybe it does not allow you to compute or to make calculus on anything, because I don't think that semiotics is reducible to calculus or to computation. So it might not help us to do practical things in our daily life. I mean, maybe a periodic table of classes of science will not allow for a more efficient computer or anything of that sort, but I am pretty convinced that will allow us a more comprehensive view of our own nature, of how our mind works and how we are in relation to what is around us or the universe, which is our environment.
I have thought your periodic table as a kind of general framework of investigation.
Perfect.
That it is something that we take in the more specific sciences as a given, that this is how logic works. And then we try to apply it to the phenomena that we are inquiring or exploring. That is exactly what I have done in my sociological inquiries, that to take your system as given and then see how it fits to the phenomena that I am experiencing.
Well, you know, in some sense, that's what I did too. Because when I did this transcendental deduction of the sign relations and I got to the periodic table, I had all the questions. Okay, I have this system. It is very interesting because it is mathematically sound. I can see the soundness of the structure, but what is it for? What I can do with this? How will I explain any of those classes of signs or what they are doing here? So that's when my research project started. That was the starting point. That was not the ending point. That's when my research project started. Well, I got this picture. I don't know what is it for. I have to find out what I can do with it. Then it is my work, it is my duty to give examples to every single type of science. So this is something that is up to me because I am proposing this system and I have to show that they are sound, the classes are sound, they can be related to reality, and we can explain things in reality that were not explainable without the use of this 66 classes of science. So that's what I'm doing now. And by doing that, I have to understand how the solenoid is organized into periods. What are those periods? So those are all questions that I had to put myself. I didn't internalize those pictures as something like epiphania, something that comes ready as a whole. No, I had to understand what sort of period was going on, what every period was doing, and then where semiosis is producing information, in which period. And those are the phases. And how can I name the phases? How can I explain how one phase relates to the other? And when that was ready, I tried, and I think I was happy in that. I tried to apply to social phenomena, to psychological phenomena, to communicational phenomena, and then what I was producing was useful. So there was this pragmatic perspective. It is working, and I can keep going on because it seems I am on the right track. And when you came with your research and told me that you had applied with good results, I was very happy because you were posing questions that were not the questions that I was posing at the moment. And when someone from a very different perspective, very different culture, repertoire, find in your system points of contact with reality, with the research that she is doing, and sees in your system a way of understanding the problems that he or she was studying, then that's a proof that the system is worth pursuing. It's worth taking seriously.
Yeah, I agree. I take it very seriously, and it has really been a kind of exploration. It is like a map that you look and how you experience things, or you read about certain kind of phenomena, and then you have your map which tells you what's the relations between these different kinds of phenomena or levels. And that is something how I approach this logic, that it does not tell us what is true or what's happening. It's not it's an empty framework in a sense, and then we
Exactly.
fill it with our experiences and phenomena, and it tells us the relations between different kinds of experiences. Or
yes, in this sense, it is heuristic.
yeah, it's a logic.
Exactly. Okay.
You came up with the 4 periods and 4 phases. That's not from Peirce, right?
No, I came up with them. Well, it was inspired in my readings of Peirce, because Peirce does say things about grounding, common ground. We need a common ground, and we get from perception. So the fact that you and me, we are part in the same nature, same universe, that means that we have the same grounding. We are getting the same sort of information. And that's why we can translate my experience into yours. Because when you open the tap, the same sort of water comes out when I open my tap. So when I say my water is fluid and fresh, you will understand what I am saying, because you have the same ground of experience. So there is this very fundamental part of our living, which is grounding from basics of perception, of experience. So I knew that this would be the first round in learning things from nature. But you not only ground and grasp differences in the world, you must represent them either in your mind or in a piece of paper or in a computer or on the rocket wall of your cave. I mean, there is a process of representation that goes, it is the first step into externalizing what is your internal experience, the world that you have experienced.
Could we say that our material bodies are also representations of the universe,
sure.
signs of the universe?
Definitely, because we are tiny parts of this whole. So
Yeah.
our bodies, you can, by looking at a body like a specimen, you can say a lot about the environment. Like if you take a snake and you study a snake, by the way it is organized, you can say a lot about the ecological niche, the system, the ecological system in which that snake was living or developed. So for sure, our bodies are in continuous dialogue, in continuous relation with the environment around us. So we are signs of the environment in which we live. So when we represent, this is the first step towards externalizing. So you have this grounding, you have this presentation, then you have this representation, and then communication. It is one period nested in the other. You ground, things must be present, then you represent, and finally you communicate. These are periods of semiosis. And you cannot have communication if you don't have representation, because you must communicate what is represented. And you cannot have representation if something was not present to be represented. So, and you cannot have anything present in your mind if you didn't have a grounding from our perception. So you see that one thing is like those Russian dolls, in which you must have the periods nested one into the other to have a functional semiosis. So these are the periods. The periods are like the structure of semiosis, because I take semiosis as very, very loosely as a synonym for communication. Whenever there is semiosis, there is communication. So you can say that every system in the universe is communication in their several degrees. So there is this transfer of information, there's communication among the systems. And then you have the phases. And the phases, they tell us where semiosis is active, in which period there is internalization of information, in which period there is habit formation. Why so? Because whenever there is habit, you put as a background, you put as something automatic, non-conscious. So one of the definitions of a habit is that when habit is formed, it is taken out of our cognitive attention. It is something related to an economy of attention. So when you get to the habit of mind, you are not paying attention anymore to what you are doing. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. When you're learning to ride a bicycle, you have all your cognitive attention in every single movement your body is doing. But once you learn to ride a bicycle, that goes automatic. So you don't have to pay attention to what you are doing anymore, because it has become habitual. So you must pay attention on the traffic lights. You have to pay attention to pedestrians, to other bike riders. So that's the economy of attention. That's the economy of cognition. So whenever there's habit, the solenoid goes dormant. Parts of the solenoid which are governed by habits. So that those parts which are not governed by habits, those are where your mind is putting effort. That's where semiosis is happening, is going on. And the phases describe this process. So you have the perceptive, and then inquire, experience, and then goes up to sharing, up to communicating a opinion, communication habit. So there's this gradient or habit formation that goes from a very phenomenological perceptive phase to a phase by which, like us now, I'm not paying attention to the screen of my computer or if the internet is working or not working. And all my effort is in the rhetoric the methodology of communication in a way that is understandable, is more persuasive, is more efficient. So you see that there is this natural gradient. But when the internet, if the connection goes down, then immediately I stopped this more abstract phase of communicating ideas, and I go down to my perceptive, my inquiry, trying to find out what's going on, what went wrong with the internet, did I disconnect some cable? So you see that we are shifting from levels or phases of semiosis, in which the more advanced one is when we are in the self-control of our thoughts, the self-control of our communication, and the lowest level is when we are trying self-control or of our own perceptive actions. So when you are grabbing your mouse, or when you are pulsing with your finger something, then you are paying attention to a more immediate perceptive action in the environment.
Or when you're dizzy, you try to get a sense of what's going on.
What's going on? So exactly.
Yeah.
So you see the phases describe this continuous gradient by which we shift levels of attention from the more of sharing ideas to the more advanced sharing idea to the more basic sharing of perceptions in reality.
That is something I found very helpful. First of all, to understand that it's a continuum, that there are no sharp edges between the phases. But this idea that in the lower phases or the more elemental phases, we are closer to the reality here and now. And then we gradually go to more abstract levels that are, well, not detached by any sense from reality, but farther away for the immediate experience, that we can be lost in our own thoughts, for example, which I found very, makes sense to me again.
Yes, and it goes in yourselves, but also in social minds. You can use the same logic to describe what would be the phase of perception in a group, like a social group. Like people are getting to know each other. They're trying to understand the reactions, and they're being very careful the way they act or react, and they are being very perceptive in the way, like you're meeting like a girl, you are interested in her, so you're very attentive to your own actions, to her actions. So you are in the very basic, you are trying to build habits of relations in the very basic level. And when you're more comfortable in that level, then you can go up in the scale and start to have a more, let's say, abstract conversation, a conversation in which we're sharing ideas because you are already comfortable in your actions, the way your body is placed, moving. So you know what I'm saying.
That's a very good example. On your first date, you don't really hear what the other people is saying.
Exactly. You are very attentive with your hands, with the other person's hands are placed, where the body is, the eyes. Oh, she's looking at me. She's looking away from me. What does that mean? So we're paying attention. Our mindset is focused on the bodies and the actions because this is crucial to build a first level of interaction. And if it goes well in that level, then we can try go higher. It's it's like the smell in the first date. If you don't like the smell of the person, I mean, it's very hard that you can take the second step because
Take it
it's
to
so
another
basic.
level.
I mean, it's impossible to go to the next level
Yeah.
if smell doesn't feel good.
That's true. I have this hypothesis that I have been working on regarding these phases in a context of society. Uh, One of the very basic fundamental problems of sociology is the relation between the individual and then the society or societal structures or symbolic structures, however you want to put it. These phases have really, how I interpret them in a sociological context, it explains the continuum between our individual immediate experience and the shared symbolical structures or institutions in a society. So in a sense, when everything is smooth in a societal context, when our habits of interaction are functioning well, when we are going to buy some food from a supermarket and everything functions, then we don't really think individually, in a sense that we are performing this habit, or we are everything works. And when the credit card doesn't function, when the food is out of supply, then we in a certain sense wake up to our individual experience and start to think, what's going on, where is this food, do I have money?
Perfect example.
Yeah.
I think in this pandemic, we can extract many situations, examples like the one you just said, because we were so used to our society functioning in a certain way that was given. I mean, it was something that you didn't have to think about it because it was all taken care of. We had this government, our bank account, we have our job or a grant, we have our relationships. You have like the weekends where you go and see your parents or visit your friends. So everything was very well prepared. The habits were functioning well, so you don't pay attention to them. When all the habits have to be broken because now we have a very different situation, very dangerous one. So you have to wash your hands 10 times a day. You have to use those alcohol gels to your hand. So you have to pay attention to where I have put my hand. Am I too close to that person? Am I speaking too loud? So what kind of dangers? So you see that we went down from the habits, social habits that were all functioning well, and now we are trying to deal on the basic phases of interaction again, and trying to build new normals. What will be the normals? What will be the normality?
New habits.
They will emerge from this very basic interaction that we are making habits of them right now. We are learning to break old habits and build new ones, and we have to build new societies from those very basic interactions. So I think now it's a sad moment, but actually a very fruitless moment to be a sociologist, because you can see this. So you have a lab in front of you. The society is a whole lab, it's a laboratory. You don't have to take people to the lab because you have a social experiment going on, and you have the tools to analyze and get meaning from what's going on. So from your perspective, it's a very happy moment.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't maybe put it that way, but in a sense, yeah, that's right. But also in that sense that our old habits were broken, we had to use much more attention, we had to use much more energy in our everyday life to form these new habits.
Yeah.
And now I notice how I automatically stay a bit further away from other people, and I don't have to think about it anymore, or I wash my hands automatically, and now I don't have to use so much energy in those situations.
But you are aware that you had to build new habits. So in those moments, this is very tiresome. You get tired because there's a lot of effort, cognitive effort, not to do the wrong things that are not wrong. They were not wrong until now, but now they are wrong. Like you you come from outside and you don't wash your hands immediately, or you don't take your shoes before you go into your apartment. So those things that you're not used to, and now you, as you say, new habits were already built. So you're not so tired as in the first days or weeks of the pandemic, in which you had to learn from the scratch.
And at the same time, we had a growth of information, right? We learned a lot about bacteria or viruses, virology, how they function, what kind of habits would help to make this pandemic less of a threat, and so on. Yeah,
It is.
that's true. This would lead us to a very interesting topic of self-control, in the sense that we had habits that we weren't maybe conscious of before this pandemic, and now after we have formed new habits, we are very conscious of them. In that sense, we don't think about them a lot, but if someone would ask us why you do that, we would have an answer. So is that something that has to do with self-control, this kind of idea that we should be we should have we should know our habits. We should know ourselves and our habits, and have a. If someone asks why you do that, we have an answer. Is that something?
Yeah, we must be prepared to have an answer. So self-control involves, maybe you do not know exactly why you are doing something in such a way, but if you are provoked, if you are asked for, you have a theory about it. You have an explanation. So this theory explanation is a belief. So there is self-control when you are prepared to give reasons about your actions. Why do you have such a conduct? Why your acts are in such way? And you must be prepared to give reasons or to expose the beliefs that are governing the rules, that are governing the ways you act, your conduct. So this is self control. The idea that you are not acting moved by habits only, because an insect can do that, a bacteria can do that, a virus can do that. They move by habits, but those are genetic habits. Those are habits that are part of their constitution. But we have mental habits that are ideas, beliefs, and we are prepared to defend them, to argue in favor of them, to justify. So whenever there is self-control, there is a ethical aspect involved, because you must you might be judged by your actions. So your friend, your wife, me, society in general might judge what you are doing, because we accept that you have reasons to do the way you do. So your actions are governed by some purposes, some reasons, some final causes, and I can judge you by the habits you have adopted to govern your rules. So I'm not judging you by your action alone. I am judging you by the habits that you profess, that you adopt. That's a ethical judgment, because otherwise it's just a moral judgment. So I'm not interested in moral judgments. I am interested in ethical judgments, which are the habits that govern self-control.
So ethics is about habits and moral is about individual acts.
Moral is about costumes.
Okay.
And costumes is something that is accepted in society. So you have different costumes, different, I don't know if I'm using the right word.
Or traditions.
Traditions. Okay, traditions, maybe. So different societies have different traditions, and those traditions involve moral choices. This is something. When we go from moral choices to ethical choices, then we are talking about normative sciences. We are talking about rules of self-control. They are much more abstract, they are much more general, and they must go beyond traditions because they must apply universally. So when we talk about ethical judgments, this is something that should be valid in any culture, in any tradition. Like, I'm honest. I am trying to be as honest as I can in my exposition of my ideas. So this is something that it is expected in every communicative interaction. That is not something that is subject to tradition, or so that's a very important difference between what is a moral judgment and what is a ethical judgment. Whatever is ethical must be abstracted and universal, and the moral ones are very contextual and related to tradition. So you have some traditions that maybe in Brazil would be strange things that we won't do.
Yeah.
And the opposite is true as well. But we must be tolerant with those traditions and be aware not to go so fast and do some moral judgments on our background, our repertoire. But when it comes to ethical judgments, then we are in a much more abstract level of self-control, of being aware of what you're doing, what are the beliefs that are governing your choices, your mental actions. By mental action, I mean thoughts. What thoughts you're having and what actions you are performing. So that's self-control.
That's something not very common in the human sciences today, that kind of view of universally binding ethical rules or habits. So, but I found that's the idea of that kind is very, gives us hope that there is common reasons and common final causes to be found amongst different cultures and different societies, and that is something that really attracts me in this whole Peircean worldview, that there is something that is over us.
Yes, and if we think about this globalization that we are living, if we don't hold this hope that there might be some ethical instances by which we are all mankind, or all humanity, might interact in some level of mutual respect. If we don't accept that, then we have a very cynical scenario by which everyone can do as it pleases to himself or to his family or to his country or to his society in expense of the others. So I don't, and we see some slogans like America great again, America first, and those kind of slogans, political slogans, ideological slogans, they give us this, at least to me, this concern that we are in a very dangerous situation because we are in a globalized culture in which leaders are taking actions moved by very particular interests. And this is the road to war. This is the road to conflict. If we take globalization serious, we must understand what would be the ethical instance of this globalization, and there should be some sort of transnational multilateral entities discussing and giving what would be the guidelines for our actions in a globalized world. Otherwise, there will be conflict in every instance.
Yeah, I would maybe take a different road on that. If we think about now, and this is just a hypothetical speculations, but I am very interested in the blockchain technologies, how they could make our institutional systems and societies a sort of self-developing organism, precisely by making communication between people something that we can trust.
Perfect. Yeah. Trust.
So that is something that I find very very promising. As
you see how this word trust is very connected with the self-control and the ethical aspects, because when there's trust, is a ethical instance being respected. So you cannot have trust if you don't have an ethical problem being solved. So blockchain could help us solving this very abstract concept of ethical judgment.
Yeah, as I see it, the situation globally is just simply so complex, so difficult, so rapidly changing, that no instance or organization or body of scientists have any they could simply not understand the whole system and give us binding rules. That is just my opinion. So I'm looking for a very revolutionary ways to change the way that we make sense as a society or as a global humankind.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I like the idea.
I like it too, but this is very in the very beginning. It's just a hypothesis. But
project.
But something that this needs as well, what I find also very important, is that this kind of idea that there is common good, there is something that we can find and share, and the possibility, even the possibility that we can communicate in an authentic fashion with one another, that I can really understand your experience, that needs a philosophical basis, and Peirce provides this kind of philosophical basis, because nowadays in human science it's a very common idea that we cannot understand the experience of others because it's just so different, and that we have our personal biases when it comes to our experiences, and we can never get rid of them, and this distorts the reality and in a sort of way separates us from one another.
Perfect. Yeah.
So I find that Peirce has thought about these problems already more than 100 years ago, and in a sense he is a postmodern philosopher, in the sense that in modern philosophy the philosophy was trying to found the eternal foundation, or the perfect communication without any distortion, how we could understand 100% and be completely neutral and completely objective. And Peirce immediately saw that that is impossible. But even though we have biases, and even though our experience of reality is also always subjective, there is hope for truth, and there is hope for common good. That I found very, very important idea in this situation that we face now globally, for example.
It is inspiring because we see so much going around us that seems to be destructive, seems to be selfish. And I think that having a philosophy that is based on continuity, based on cynicism, based on this evolutionary love, this idea that there can be truth only if we interact as a community, if we pursue the same goals, the same purposes. So this idea for me is very inspiring because it gives us hope that we as species, humanity, we not necessarily we must each one of us go by its own business and search its own happiness in a very utilitarian perspective. Maybe there is some room for a altruistic perspective, a more social, some would say socialist, but I'm not discomfortable with this idea because Peirce was considered a logical socialist in the sense that logic can only pursue its goals in society. We need society. We are gregarious people, so we need the others. We need this enterprise to be common to reach some point. Alone, we cannot reach any point. That's why Peirce was so adamant in defending a realist view of knowledge instead of a nominalist view of knowledge. Because the nominalist view is very particular, is individual, it is solipsistic and sometimes selfish. And if we take a realist instance, we have to deal with society, with being together, we being part or a greater whole. And I think this is the right track. Alone, we cannot do anything, but together we might. It's not necessarily that we can, but we might be able to do something.
I think so too, but I think the thing you just said is so important to say again, that these ideas of common good or common truth are not based on idealism, in a sense that, oh, it would be so nice, it would be so great if we all could come together, but they are logical necessities that
Logic.
in order to have truth, in order to have knowledge, that is necessarily a, a societal thing. That science is not pursued by individual scientists, but a community of scientists, a community of inquirers. And these ideas, they derive from logic, not from some
There is
idealistic philosophy.
a quotation from Peirce. He says, "Nothing is more logical than altruism."
Yeah.
That's Peirce saying. So he's coming to the consequence of adopting a realistic conception of logic. So it is logical to be altruist. What is altruism? Is be ready to to give yourself to the good of your community. So to be prepared for that, that the permanence of my society, of the community, of or humanity is more important than my individual survival. So this is logical. That's a logical instance because the general is more important than the individual in Peirce's view.
Yeah, the pursuit of truth is necessarily over that goes past many generations. It's something that scientists will give their energy and their life to pursue truth in an altruistic way. And this is very interesting, this kind of that it is rational to be altruistic, which is the exact opposite of the current economic theory, the neoclassical economics, which is that it is rational to be selfish. This is quite interesting.
Well, maybe that's why we are maybe close to the no the point of no return uh, in our relation with nature. We
Yeah.
see examples everywhere. Because this idea of always everyone goes by its own business and try to maximize its gains and be extract as much pleasure as you can from the experience of your own particular life. And if everyone does that, in the end, society will be happy. That's bullshit. I mean, this
Yeah.
is completely wrong because we see that this works well for the 1% of our population.
Yeah.
For 99%, this is not going very well. And that's why we are going quickly into this very difficult mess. There
Yeah.
is problems all over the place, and we won't be able to solve them or to deal with them by taking this uh, very ultra liberal approach to economics or to society.
Yeah, and the underlying thing again, what I have found is this idea that we are separate, that we are all separate individuals pursuing our own individual goals and pleasures, and we have this philosophy, what Peirce would maybe call philosophy of greed, that when we all pursue our individual desires, that leads to the best possible state for the whole of society, and that is obviously a false
He even
thing.
calls the banjo of greed.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I think there is one thing we have to discuss now, and that's aesthetics, in the sense that that is something very fundamental for Peirce, that there are things that are beautiful in themselves, that are ideals in themselves, that need no, I guess, ulterior reason, or how he would put it. Could you elaborate this kind of, it's a very underdeveloped part of Peirce's philosophy, but a very important one.
Yeah, you're right. Well, we must remember that logic, semiotics, ethics, and aesthetics, they are a triad, which are the normative sciences. So we have already talked about semiotics, which is logic. We talked a little bit about ethics, and now we are going to the basis, which is aesthetics. So aesthetics is the normative science, which is the closest to phenomenology. So if we take Peirce's architecture, we see that there is mathematics, then phenomenology, and then the normative sciences. And aesthetics is the one which is closest to phenomenology. And there is a reason for that, because if we remember of Kant, his transcendental aesthetics, it is the part of the reasoning which is connected with the a priori categories of space and time. So how our minds organize what we perceive by some sort of projection of space-time, the a priori categories of space and time. So we organize, we make arrangements in our phenomenology by using this aesthetic procedure of projecting and organizing in space-time the impressions of sense. So Peirce develops from Kant. His idea of aesthetic is connected with firstness. Why firstness? Because our first impressions when we are experience reality, when we are perceiving the continuous of perception, the impressions which arrive through our senses by the gates of our perceptive apparatus, they are experienced in our phenomenon. The phenomenon being, let's say, the appearances. What are the appearances in our perceptive work? And the first level are the things as they appear in themselves. So this is as the work of aesthetic, to study and trying to understand everything that appears in themselves without worrying about their meaning. So we are not yet trying to understand the meaning or trying to communicate what we have apprehended. But whatever we apprehend in its firstness, it can be a hallucination, it can be a dream, it can be proprioception, I mean perception of our own bodies, like I feel cold, I feel pain, or everything that comes from the external world. So those are appearances. We don't judge them if by their sources. We take them as given and we try to understand what are in them. So how can we judge those appearances? This is the work of aesthetics. So in Peirce's sense, aesthetic is a normative sense that tries to understand the harmonic relations, what sort of habits, what sort of connections there might be in those first impressions of senses, in those appearances. And as a normative science, what Peirce says is there must be some patterns, there must be some regularities in our appearances, and those regularities they call for explanation. So whenever there is regularity, there must be science trying to understand from where they come and what are their most deep meaning. So as a normative science, aesthetic tries to understand, tries to identify the regularities of our appearances and what there might be in meaning. What meanings can we extract from those regularities? So that's in a very comprehensive, in a nutshell, what Peirce's theory of aesthetic mean. What interests us is that aesthetics will give the principles or the foundations of ethics. And then ethics will give the foundations of logic. So when we say semiosis as the action of science, if there is action, there is an ethical instance involved. So whenever there's semiosis, there must be the possibility of judging from ethical principles. And whenever there is a judgment from ethical principle, there must be some aesthetical theory that is grounding your ethical judgments. So in the end, and at the most basic level of our normative sciences, we must learn from or study what are the regularities, the patterns that come from our perception, our regularities of apprehension, our regularities of phenomenon. If we study that and if we learn from that, we will have the most foundational ideas, the most foundational habits that connect us to the universe. Because if there is hope for a connaturality between our ways of thinking and the ways that the universe work, if there is connaturality, then aesthetic will reveal them. Aesthetic will not explain them. Aesthetic will not give reason to them, but aesthetic will show that they are real, and we can start to build our ethical choices and our logical decisions by this feeling, this aesthetical feeling that we are having this new nurture from the universe. The universe is giving us this essence that can be learned only from aesthetical experience.
And this kind of this triad of normative sciences is a very, very interesting idea. Could it be conceptualized in a sense that logic is the ethics of thinking, as we think about thoughts as mind actions? So it's the ethical way how we should think in order to attain truth. And as mind action, it's an action, so it's an ethical pursuit. In that sense, and ethics is the science of how we should act in order to reach these ideals or goals. And aesthetics is the science that explores what are these ideals or larger tendencies or patterns, as you said, which I find a very, very good word. Is that in the right direction?
It is perfect, exactly. Yeah. You said in a much more concise and clear way than I did. But it is exactly that, because it is like a ladder. So you have the logic action, then you have the ethical norms, and then you have the aesthetical inspiration, the ideals that will put you in a certain mood, certain emotional state that will allow you to act in a certain sense. So this is something very important. You can only think in the right mood when you feel in a right way. So thinking in a correct manner involves you feeling, you having an emotional instance, which is the basis of your thinking. That's why it's very difficult to be correct with someone if you're hating the person.
If you're angry, you cannot reason.
Exactly. If you're angry, if you hate, that's why people are, when they are voting, and to vote is an action. You are electing someone. If you are hating an opponent, if you are hating a party, if you're so you're acting moved by hate. So you are aesthetically contaminated by this feeling, and your action, your vote or your political action will be inspired by this feeling, and for sure your act will not be in the good of the society, because when you hate someone, it's something personal. So your action will be to satisfy your own necessities, not the necessities or the goals of your community or society. So that's why we should take aesthetics so seriously, because when you produce those ideals or aesthetical patterns, you are preparing some sort of actions. Walter Benjamin, I don't know if you know.
I haven't read anything. No, I don't really. I'm
Benjamin,
not familiar.
It is a philosopher from the Frankfurt School, the critical thinking. He was a Marxist, and he has this very important work, which is the work of art in the era of its technical reproducibility. If you can easily find it on internet. But in the end of his article, he says the fascism must aestheticize politics. So whenever a fascist government wants to rule, it takes aesthetics into politics. So if you take like the fashion, the Italian fashions, Mussolini, or the Nazism, or any sort of authoritarian government, you see that there is a very stage control aesthetics, because they must apply aesthetics to the politics. And the counterpart, so if you want to fight against fascism, you must politicize aesthetics. You must do the opposite. You must what is to politicize aesthetic? Is to take the discussion of aesthetic to society. You must debate aesthetics. You must produce socially aesthetics. Artists must be free to operate. That's why a fascist government, they don't like artists. They want artists to be under their control, because artists are the ones who always take aesthetic into the agora. Agora is the public forum. So when you take aesthetics into agora and people start to think about aesthetics, new free ideas start to pop up. And this is not a good thing for a authoritarian government.
Novelty is not good thing.
Not a good thing, because they don't want people to have original good ideas, because they want people to act as their ideals, which are very dogmatic, very strict. So they must control artists, or they must exile the artist. So aesthetics has a crucial role in our society, because it is from the aesthetic development. When you improve aesthetics, when you act aesthetically, new ideas start to be communicated in society, and we start to change. We go into a new actions, new ethical choices. You see, there is this.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense that a totalitarian regime or society would control the aesthetic ideals, and in a sense, this brings us back to the systematic view of the universe. This kind of control the amount of novelty that can flow into the society or the societal mind, and in that sense control that the order that they want to establish is not compromised, that the habits stay rigid and are not developed or changed. That's perfect. But one thing that I found very, very useful in our ordinary lives and ordinary thinking is this triad. And it's also the triad of feeling, action, and thought, which is also this. It has the same logic, that there can be feeling just as it is without any action or rational thought, and then there can be action, but action always has a feeling that produces action, or we act on a basis of some belief, some feeling. But every action is not rational. There is a lot of action that is not thought out or any sense conscious. And when we have thoughts or when we think, it's an action. We act. Mind action is a great word, and there is this feeling also beneath that all. And but to think about aesthetics as ideals, one of thoughts that I have had is that ethics, in a sense, is the means. It inquires what are the means, what the action to some end, and aesthetic is the science of those ends. And in a sense, the nature of an aesthetic ideal is something that is good in itself, and every kind of development or towards that ideal is good also in itself. That this kind of triad makes it impossible that we would have ideals or this kind of utopian thinking that the end justifies the means.
Exactly.
Because the ideals or the ends that we are developing towards must have such a nature that every step towards that end is beautiful and good and true in itself. So, for example, the scientific pursuit of truth is an aesthetic ideal, because although we make mistakes and so on, but still the idea of going towards truth is noble and good in itself, regardless of individual or particular actions that we make.
Perfect. I agree.